Well, hello, everybody. This is Finding Your Market, Growing with a Purpose. It's a virtual workshop for food and farm entrepreneurs that are looking to grow to meet the market's needs. And this is led by Refresh Appalachia, which is a program of Coalfield Development. My name is Robert Trombley. I am the Sales and Logistics Coordinator for Refresh Appalachia, which is the agricultural program of Coalfield Development. My background is in retail sales, distribution, and brand management. And with this background and my background in the local food space, I feel pretty confident walking everybody through understanding how to assess and meet their market needs. For those of you who do not know about Refresh Appalachia, we were founded in 2015. And as I mentioned, we're the agricultural program of Coalfield Development. We focus on developing, shaping, and supporting the food and farm sector in Central Appalachia. Our work in the region's local food system is rooted in our four key focus areas. And we have workforce development programs where we aim to remove barriers to employment through paid on-the-job trainings and personal and professional development for our workforce. And then we also provide training and technical assistance from all the way from beginning to advanced farmers and food producers. And then we also have Food Hub distribution, which is my primary focus in the workplace, which is where we assist local farmers with aggregation and distribution of their produce and food products into markets, schools, and institutions. All right. And for today's teachings, we will be looking for four learning outcomes today. First, we'll be looking to analyze the market opportunities by identifying the market's needs. Second, we'll be understanding demand-driven production versus supply-driven sales. Third, we'll evaluate market types that can be retail, wholesale, institutional, or food hub programs or food programs. And then number four, identify strategies for building market resiliency. All right, so part one is analyzing market opportunities. So here, identifying and evaluating your markets. First, why does your market fit matter? Well, bottom line is, when you own a business, your goal is to make money. And so you want to make sales. And if you don't have a fit in that market, it's going to be hard to make sales. So questions you got to ask yourself when looking for your market fit and why it matters is, do you have a buyer? And when you have a buyer, are you aligning with the real-time demand? And what are the benefits of working with these buyers? And what are the benefits you can provide them? And then number two, are you assessing your market demand and your fit? So with this earlier, I mentioned, do you have a buyer? And so with this, you have questions that you're going to want to ask these buyers. Questions like, what products are you missing currently that you would like to have that's not being produced? And what are you currently receiving that maybe isn't local? There might be a place where you could fit in there where they're currently getting product. And then also ask them what needs improving. That doesn't always mean the product per se. They might say, I get this lettuce and the quality isn't always great. So if you can get me a better quality lettuce. But sometimes it's processes that need improving. They might be getting product from someone where it's inconsistent deliveries, it's hard to get a hold of them, it's not a streamlined process, they're not showing up on the assigned day. So just having those kind of conversations, sometimes it's not all about the product itself, but what else needs improving beyond that. And still on that number two bullet point, there's different tools you can use to assess this market demand in your fit, like account visits. I find these to be very helpful where you actually go out, sometimes just go out and order some food, like there's a local restaurant here that their salad that they serve is all arugula. And I'm pretty positive they don't buy that from a local grower. So if you go sit down, you notice, wow, they just use arugula. I can grow that. Um, just that kind of account visit, or it can be an account visit where you just ask directly, hey, can I talk to the buyer? And once, not always are the buyers available. So that's why it's always nice to have a follow-up like buyer interest form or something digital where you could say, oh, okay. Because that happens a lot where they're like, oh no, they're not available because they think you're like a somebody trying to sell them something other than produce. They don't know you. So it's nice to say, oh, can I get a card? Can I follow up with a buyer interest form? And from there, you can create a demand list. So you can go around and talk to other accounts and say, hey, these folks said they were interested in, I'll just keep picking on arugula. They were interested in arugula. Is that something you can see yourself using or do you currently use? And then number three, do you currently have the capacity to meet market demands? And we want to assess the things that kind of go into a farm and food operation. Number one, there's always labor. Do you have the land? Seasonality is always a big one. We love when people ask us in the middle of December for homegrown tomatoes. And then how is the product handled? Do you have what you need to handle the product to keep it shelf stable and keep the quality fresh to where it gets to the buyer? And then being able to match your capacity with the market expectations. You don't want to overproduce, underproduce, but you still want to make money. So how do you hit that sweet spot? Just keeping all that in mind as you go through it. Part two is that shifting to a demand-driven production versus supply-driven sales. So when you're looking at demand-driven versus supply-driven, um, you have a few things you need to ask yourself. And one of the first one is, are you growing to actually meet the demand? And if you go out and assess the demand, you figured out what it is, now you're growing to meet it. And so have you assessed the market needs? As in the last slide, we talked about how to do that. Go out and assess the market needs, and then are you growing what you like or are you growing what they need? I like to use, I pick on green beans a lot for this one. Here in this area, you'll have people say, for retail, oh, I love half runners. Okay. The farmer loves half runners, everybody loves half runners, but if you're just growing half runners and you try to sell into a kitchen, they may do it for a special, if they're doing a regional special on the menu. But for the most part, we talked about labor earlier for your food and farm business. They might want stringless green beans so they can just chop them up, cook them, and keep that labor cost down. Um, and then, so are you growing what they need or what you like? And then can you consistently meet the demand for quantity and quality? Like I mentioned earlier, it's not always a product that needs improving. If you're going to try to sell in and tell someone like, hey, I can improve on the process, you need to make sure that you are able to meet the quantity and quality that they are expecting, both on process and on product. And then can you meet variety, packaging, pricing, and timing demands? Different markets have different needs when it comes to variety. Your retail market may want three different varieties of squash, where you're selling into an institution, they just want one type. Packaging is going to look very different between your different markets. Your pricing is going to look very different between your markets. And then timing demands are also very different between your markets. And then also, what are your goals? Are you looking for margin sales? Are you trying to make a higher margin? Or are you trying to move volume? Or are you trying to do both? And then are you asking questions as things progress? Not everything is just always, once we get it going, everything's just great. So you want to make sure you're constantly checking in and asking them, how are things going? How can you improve? Always be looking into next year. It kind of helps solidify that partnership too, where you're making plans for next year. They're less likely to change on you last minute to someone else or something like that. And then are there other people interested? Working with all these different markets, you want to make sure that you're still growing and still having options and asking, are there other people that are looking for this as well? Right. All right. And then we have there's tools for this too, communication feedback tools. They're tools that we use to engage the market, and also consumers, and find and meet that demand. So a lot of these communication feedback tools are very helpful because, like I mentioned last slide, um, you want that feedback and you constantly want that feedback so you can improve. Some things you can start with is lists and live inventory. This will give your buyers and your consumers real-time inventory, and which generates confidence in your buyers. And then it helps sell your entire portfolio. I can't tell you how many times I've just tried to list things off the top of my head, or try to put things in manually and like just send somebody a text message about like, oh, here's what I have, and I don't have everything in front of me. And I'm always kicking myself after those conversations because I'm like, oh man, I forgot this. Or, oh, you know what? I bet you if they would have saw this, they would have had a good menu idea to put these two things together. And so you kind of miss things. Um, then you're not selling the entire portfolio if you don't have lists and live inventory. And I know that's not always easy. So just do the best you can and make sure you're communicating openly, that you're doing the best you can. Second tool you could use, surveys and feedback tools. So this way you can get real-time feedback from on your products, services, and your processes. And then it creates mutual participation and trust, to where, I mentioned earlier, you are going doing account visits, you're going out there and putting in the legwork. It's nice sometimes, you can sit there and have that feedback come to you as well by sending out the surveys and having those feedback tools, which kind of leads into number three, where you can have an ordering platform and you can add reviews on there, which is another feedback tool where you don't have to go out and search for feedback. Ordering platforms are nice because they combined that first part that I talked about where you have lists and live inventory, but also you can have ordering like right there. So it kind of puts all that together so you're not doing multiple things. You get it all in one tool. And then if you add the reviews, it gives the feedback. And it also creates real-time transactions, which is awesome. It's the reason I'm looking into e-commerce and ordering platforms for the food hub. Um, is just having that real-time transaction. You don't have a net 15, 30, or 60 where you're tracking down invoices and trying to get payment. Um, and it gives them that real-time invoice a lot of the times on these platforms too, where they put in their order and it says, here's what you ordered. There's not a person manually on the back end punching it in and they're waiting for that. And then the last tool I would suggest is social media. I know that that one can be very daunting to a lot of people, but it's really important, even if it's just putting out a list weekly, and getting your consumers knowing, hey, on Mondays, the farmer puts out the list that they have for this week. Just doing something like that, or you can get more in depth where you're posting every day or three times a week and you have themed postings, like you're going to educate this day or you're going to try to sell something this day, etc. But with social media, it creates that brand visibility. It puts you out there, public facing, um, instead of people going online and looking up where is a farm near me. They might come across their feed. And then it engages with the community, which is a very big deal. It makes people feel like they're part of something. They feel like they are part of the farming operation, and they feel like they are part of the community, which they are. But having that feeling is just it makes it all the better, and being able to engage on social media, comment, get a comment back, like, hey, what time are you going to be there today? Like, it just makes them feel more involved. And then it also helps create that sense of consistency that I mentioned earlier, where there's always someone there, you could talk to them, and your needs are going to be addressed. All right. And that brings us to part three, which is where you are evaluating your different market types. So what are the different market types? I built this little, uh, I guess, graph or something for you guys here. It gives a nice breakdown of market type, the volume, the different margins, and the demands for the different market types. And I tried to put them in order of the volume and margins. So you have your retail, which is your direct to consumer. If you're Huntington local, you probably heard of the Wild Ramp, which is a year-round indoor farmers market. There's other markets out there that are modeled like this. It's just the first one that comes to my mind, where it's low volume compared to other markets. You know, it's not saying you can't move good volume through it. That's still a possibility. The margins are usually higher because you're putting more into it. You're bringing it to market. You're making the labels. You're doing all the legwork for it. And the demand's there for retail. Packaging is always a big one. You know, is your retail market, are are they requiring a UPC barcode? You know, a lot of the times you have to have your name and address. If you have to have nutritional facts, things like that that are just very important for a retail setting. And then also a personalized story, which could also be on your packaging. And a personalized story is important all the way through market types and the supply chain. But in that retail, that direct to consumer, at your farmer's market, that is, it's just more important there, if that makes sense. That's like your very hyper local people coming there to talk to you, to engage with you, and learn more about your business. So having that personalized story is very important there. Food programs is one that I mentioned earlier. It's a newer market type to a lot of people. Um, these food programs are, you might hear the term food is medicine being used as well, but they're programs like medically indicated food boxes where a health center or a hospital might pull down some funding to get their patients produce to help with medical issues, you know, hypertension, blood pressure, things of that nature, whatever it may be, and they'll tailor the food programs to those patients. So that this one kind of is varying, you know, that's why I kind of put it here in the middle. It can be low margin, it could be medium margin, it could be high margin. It really depends on the food program, who's running it, and how it's run. If you get set up where you're the only farmer doing it and you're doing all the distribution and everything, I'm pretty sure you can get some good margin out of that and some good volume. Um, but if it's a program where they want multiple different farmers, multiple different produce, and you don't have that crop diversification to meet that, you know, it might be a little lower volume. And then also how many different programs are running at once. I mean, I had 3 or 4 different programs this summer running. Um, so if I had one farmer that could fill them all, he was doing pretty good volume for each program. But some farmers, you know, they might be able to just do the program that has 10 patients. So that's pretty low volume for them. So food programs are fun because you kind of pick and play as well. And then the margin there, that once again is dependent on how the program is run. I did our programs over the summer just because I was doing the distribution, and with the distribution, trying to get uh, the costs of that covered can be a little tricky. So it's a lot easier for me to do a wholesale food program. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that are doing like consignment model programs where farmers are going in together and then splitting up at the end. So I put the margin there as varying. So if you're doing a wholesale program, I expected low pricing, like as low as possible, so we can get as much produce in the boxes as possible, and I'm able to cover our distribution fees. So it's really depends on how it's run. And then wholesale, where it's not you selling direct to the consumer, that would be like your grocery stores, restaurants, like your food service, where you're trying to do a high volume, you're trying to move product, but you're usually going to get a low margin. I remember a chicken farmer said to me one time, you know, I love to make a lot of money off every bird, but if I could sell 1,000 birds and only make $1 off every one, that would still be nice too. So it really depends on what you're looking for. Um, and these all require consistency and volume with them. I kind of forgot to mention on the food programs, what can be tough with that is I mentioned there are multiple programs running sometimes. So if you're trying to get into every program, there could be multiple deadlines. Like I need you to deliver the potatoes on Monday for one program, but the eggplant's on a Wednesday, and it's really depending on people's delivery days and stuff like that. Um, so then that moves us into institutions, where that is a very high volume because you're not selling it to somebody, putting on a shelf and waiting for it to sell. These institutions know we have X amount of employees, we have X amount of students that we need to feed per day. And so you are supplying a known, we are feeding this many people. And a lot of the times with institutions, well, before I get into that, I'll say it's low margin as well, just like with wholesale, because everybody's going to want to get as much food as possible for the price to feed as many people as possible. And in wholesale, they want to make their margins. In institutions, they just want to keep their food costs down. Um, but institutions, you are working with a lot of vulnerable populations with institutions. So even though in wholesale markets, like some people may know that they require pretty strict safety standards for food safety, institutions are a lot of the times can be even stricter. Like in a wholesale market, for instance, I can sell microgreens to people, but I've had people tell me, oh, I can't take microgreens because of the way it's grown and I'm serving it to children. Makes total sense. You know, they're working with vulnerable populations, they have to have stricter guidelines. Um, so keep that in mind when you're going into that. Make sure you have a farm and food safety plan, and GAP and FSMA certification if you're trying to get into these wholesale and institutional markets. Um, and with that too, the food safety standards, I have met some wholesale vendors that if you at least show them that you're making the effort, sometimes that's good enough for them. Like I have a farm and food safety plan. I may not have gotten the certification, but I can show you that I am doing the right things. And they will be more lenient sometimes, depending on the buyer and how big of a brand they are. Institutions, very little wiggle room for stuff like that. It has to be certified food safety. And then if you were in the last presentation I did, you probably recognize this slide. I kept it because there's multiple different types of wholesale markets. I would say a lot of the times we typically just think of the grocery store. So what does wholesale mean? In food production, wholesale refers to selling your products in large quantities, usually at a lower per unit price, so that low margin, like I was saying, and you're selling it to buyers who are not the end consumer. It involves business to business relationships and can change how you manage production and logistics. So it's more than just the grocery stores, is pretty much why I left this slide. Who are your wholesale buyers? There's restaurants. There are some farmers markets, like I mentioned, the Wild Ramp, where they're a consignment model. That's where the farmers they don't have to booth, so they can just drop off their product, make their own schedules. And some of them are larger producers. So like a dairy, for instance, we have a dairy producer. They're wholesale there. So the farmers market actually buys that out front, adds their retail margins onto it, and sells it out the door. And then, like I mentioned too, food programs can be wholesale buyers as well. And then how are prices determined in a wholesale market? Competition, supply and demand, and then market shifts. And then what factors are important? And you saw this a lot on the last slide and a couple before this, but consistency, reliability, and food safety are all very important. And then let's see here. Retail and food programs. What are the pros and cons of growing for retail and in food programs? The pros, I would say, are you usually get higher margins. Like I said, depending on the food program, but for the most part, you usually get higher margins than going wholesale or institutions. You create more consumer relationships. Uh, when you are selling into direct to consumer, like I said, you're out in the community, you're talking to people, you're handing them the produce. Or if you're selling at a consignment model, you're able to put your story on the label. They might see you dropping off, they'll talk to you. And then in a food program, for instance, I had people this year be like, man, please tell me you brought those cantaloupe from that farmer last year. It does create those consumer relationships that are more personal. Um, and then it helps you grow with a purpose. When you feel part of a community, at least I feel this way when I'm part of a community, is I feel like I have more purpose. So when you're doing that direct to consumer, you're out there at the market, um, you get that feeling. And then also the food programs, like I mentioned, these are medically indicated food boxes, patients, whether they have hypertension. We do some with cancer centers. So growing with a purpose. And then I'd say the cons are um, time consuming. Food programs, so. Once again, depends how the programs run. For my farmers, it was not time consuming for the most part. They just dropped it off, handed me a slip. I turned the slip into finance and they got paid. And every week they're just doing the same thing. I handled the distribution, all that. But like I said, if you get into a food program where you're supplying it all and you're doing three programs, that can be very time consuming. Direct to consumer sales and retail, you got to put gas in the truck, load up all the produce, take it out there. And then if you have shrinkage, you got to figure out what to do with that after the market, all that good stuff. Um, Cons, I'd say, are less or inconsistent volume. Um, for retail, we all know that you're kind of at the whims of the market. So you can have less volume sometimes. Sometimes you can have higher volume, but that's where the inconsistent part comes in, where you don't know week over week what you're going to sell. It really depends. And for food programs, if you're not doing the program by yourself and you're working with like a food hub, or it's a program that's requiring multiple farmers, like a lot of the ones I work with, so they can spread the love. Um, you can have inconsistent volume. Like one week may just use you for tomatoes, and then the week after they might use you for lettuce, green beans, and apples. So it's just really depends. And then like I mentioned, the sales are more unpredictable. There's the whims of the market. All right. And then wholesale and institutions. I put these in the same one because they're pretty close together when it comes to volume and margin. So the pros and cons of growing for wholesale markets and institutions, I'd say the pros are higher volume and consistent volume. You can always count on it. It's there as long as you can produce it. Consistent sales, once again, is there as long as you can produce it. Less packaging needs. Farmers love this one because I talk to them a lot about when they feel like they may have outgrown like a retail market, they'll call me and we'll have this initial conversation. And I give the packaging breakdown like I did to you, where you don't need a barcode. Everything doesn't have to be in an individual package for the most part. Sometimes they might ask for green beans parsed out per patient, but it's nice where the farmers can just walk up and just hand me a box full of zucchini in a wax box and just walk away. And they don't have to pack every single individual bag, especially for institutions. It's all getting cooked anyways for the most part. So, and then cons, oh, sorry, I missed a pro there. Further reach. You're getting out there more if you're getting into a hospital system or a wholesale market or a grocery store. Even if you're not distributing it yourself, like I know there's a local chain here called Food Fair. For the most part, they're a one warehouse drop, and from there they do their own distribution. So you're getting further reach sometimes, for the most part. And then cons, like we've already mentioned, lower margins. That's part of that higher volume play. It's just the nature of it. And then you get higher demand for consistency and quality. Um, they are definitely, like I mentioned, gonna beat on that, just making sure that we're taking care of the people that they're serving. You go to the grocery store and you expect from a wholesale market when you see something on the shelf a certain quality and consistency to it. So sometimes those buyers will have that. And then, like I already mentioned, the stricter standards for food safety, working with those vulnerable populations. All right. And then that leads us into part four, which is the strategies for market resiliency. All right. So diverse markets create resilience. And diversification is a big word, but we ask, like, what is it when it comes to agriculture? And when I think of it, I think of two things. I think of crop diversification, which is one a lot of people might think of initially too, which is the practice of growing a variety of different crops in a specific area to enhance not just productivity, but you reduce risks and promote sustainability. So it's pretty much just not monocropping. You know, you see it with corn farmers where they'll grow corn and then they'll flip into their soybeans and they'll rotate those in and out. Different crop rotations for different pests, etc. And then there's market diversification. And this one's really important because we've all heard the term, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's literally what market diversification is. And in a way, that's what crop diversification is as well. But if there's market changes, funding cuts, if you have a crop loss, what do you have to fall back on? Do you have other markets to fall back on or other crops to fall back on? Um, and it helps you avoid being dependent on a single buyer or a small group of buyers. It's never a good feeling to feel like I guess maybe it's not the best term, but feel like you're in somebody's pocket, like they're the only person you have to like work with. It's a little freeing to know you have options, I guess. So just try to avoid being dependent. And if you have a great relationship and you've built that trust, I'm not saying don't run it, do that. That's great too. But just make sure you're always keeping that in the back of your mind. Like, what if something changes? What if there is something that happens? How do I prepare for that? And then that opens new opportunities for growth when you're doing that. And like I mentioned earlier, ask when you're working with a market, are there other people interested? And when you have a portfolio of multiple different crops, you might be selling, oh, I'll bring up arugula again. You got that guy to buy your arugula and you're selling it to him. And you say, I have these radishes. Is there anybody you know in the market? And yeah, so it opens up new opportunities too. And then strategies for diversification. Like I said, sell into multiple markets. You don't have to just do retail. You don't have to just do wholesale. A lot of the farmers I work with for the food programs are doing multiple. I can think of one farmer off the top of my head in Ohio that they sell wholesale. They sell to institutions. They sold in the food program and they sell at the Wild Ramp direct to consumer. So they are making sure, and that's a lesson that they taught me too, is that market diversification. They told me the story of their farm and how they had to do that or they wouldn't have made it. So selling into multiple markets and keeping that there in the back of your head is great. And then you explore year-round income, value-added products, freeze drying, canning, selling or selling to people who make value added or doing a co-packer, something like that, or agritourism is a big one. That same farmer I mentioned, Ohio, they do weddings, they grow flowers, um, they have hay rides, they do whatever they can to get people out there and to keep it just from being a seasonality thing. Um, and I even had somebody tell me recently when I was visiting in Athens, he knew somebody who was doing a not a prawn farm, a crawfish farm. And in the off season, they did duck hunting there. So just thinking through all this stuff, what can you do? Just stuff like that. And then also extending your seasons. We brought up crop diversification already, high tunnels, low tunnels. And then also I mentioned freeze dryers, canning. Those are season extending things to where you're reducing your shrinkage. And then pricing and distribution planning. You got to assess your costs, margins. You got to look at your shrinkage, and then volume for the different markets. And then if you came to my last presentation, you heard me talk all about the considerations you need to keep in mind when looking at self-distribution or using a distributor. And using a distributor can look multiple different ways. We operate a food hub, or there are distributors like Crook Brothers, Sodexo, and whatnot. And then let's see here, building long-term market relationships. Let's see. So consistency, ease of process, and communication are key to building strong market relationships. If you have those three things down pat, people are going to love you. That's what I've noticed so far is you're consistent, Your process is easy. They can order easy, no sweat. The guy always shows up on time. And if there are issues, you're communicating it. You're saying, hey, I can't deliver today because of X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the time people understand because at the end of the day, we're all human. And most of the time I learned if they're not understanding, they might just be having an off day. And as long as you're communicating and you're there and you're talking to them, usually it smooths out for the most part. Let's see here. Strong market relationships foster opportunities for growth and potential future partnerships. And I feel like I'm bringing this up a lot, but yeah, just making sure you're constantly staying on top of, is there anyone else interested? Who else do you know who might want this? Or is there somebody who's looking for me to grow something for them specifically? Because I'm willing to do that. So keeping all that in mind. All right. And from today's teaching, the key takeaways I was hoping everybody would walk away with is getting to know the entire market and its needs. There's a lot of farmers that I'll talk to where the only market to them is that direct consumer market, and that's all they've known, and some of them are just happy doing that, and that's totally fine. But if you are looking to grow, getting to know the entire market and its needs, some people might not even think to go sit down at a restaurant and order their salad and like I mentioned earlier and see what they're using. And then two, grow with intention. That demand versus supply driven. Are you growing what people need, or are you growing what you like? Um, and then we just talked about that diversification of crops and markets. Both of them creates market resiliency. And then all that, I feel number four, adaptability and open communication opens doors. So being adaptable, being flexible, not rigid, open communication really opens doors for opportunity. And you hear people say things like, "Oh, I love working with John because John's great." And then they start telling stories, and that's just all because you were just real with them. You're a human, you're adaptable, and you're communicating. All right. And I wanted to end this with some resources. Obviously, you all know we are Refresh Appalachia, and we help with through the Food Hub and other resources with market access, distribution, logistics, marketing and social media, and community outreach. So if you need anything, reach out. That's my information there. But if it's something beyond market access, distribution, or logistics, obviously, I'd be very happy to point you in the right direction. And then I put the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, specifically their West Virginia Grown program. If you're not familiar with this and you are a West Virginia grower, I would definitely look into it. It's a program that helps farmers and food producers market their product and reach new buyers. And when you join the program, not only do you get put in the West Virginia Farmers Market Guide and Directory for locally grown products, you get to use the West Virginia Grown label. And just working in branding, a label like that, especially coming from a state entity like that, creates visibility, not just visibility, but trust and credibility. Um, and so it makes it easier for you to access new markets and especially for people who prioritize locally sourced products. Because if they don't know any farmers and they don't know anyone, they're going to Google it. And if you Google West Virginia local food, I guarantee you the growing program is going to come up, or the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. And then finally, I mentioned them a few times, and I'm sure if you don't live in this area, reach out and I might be able to find you farmers markets in your area. I work with some in Fayetteville. We just had one open up in Boone County. So the Wild Ramp obviously isn't the only one out there, but they're a year-round indoor farmers market, and they're community centered, community started. They operate as a consignment model and like a retail storefront, so farmers don't actually need a booth there, and they can control their own inventory and sales for the most part. And during the growing season, they also partner with the Central City Farmers Market out back. And so you can sell in both markets. You can do a direct consumer out back, or you can do a direct consumer consignment model on the indoors. So Wild Ramp's a great option. If you don't live in this area and you're looking for other options, please reach out. I'd be happy to connect you to them. And so that kind of brings us to the end, the open discussion and the questions. And here's all our my contact information if you need it. So.
Rob, I have a couple questions from some folks who weren't able to join us live. I know that a few of you have hopped into this presentation as we've been going, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll address them here. Just to remind everyone, the recording of this presentation will be sent out to everyone who registered, so no worries if you missed part of it. We'll make sure that you get to see the whole thing. But I have a question here. One person asked, what market types do you recommend for a beginning farmer who's looking to establish themselves?
Hmm. Definitely the wild ramp or a farmer's market style like that, or a direct consumer retail. I would say that, or I have some farmers that um, did the food program where I had only 10 patients, and that was very feasible for them. And there's no pressure with a food program too. I had one farmer that he personally felt bad sometimes that he couldn't produce for it, and I said, it's fine. You bring it to me when you have it, as long as it's within the 15 weeks of the program, and I'll fit you in, you know. So um ones that are flexible, I would say, looking for that flexibility. Once you get into the wholesale and the institution, it's such high demand that you need to make sure you're ready for that. So I would definitely start with your direct to consumer farmers markets, um, and or consignment model ones, and then look for those food programs, maybe the smaller scale ones. And pharmacy is a good people to reach out to if you're looking for food programs. I know I keep talking about them, but that's a big one here in the area. So pharmacy with an F, Farmacy, or if you're in this area, I work with them. So reach out to me as well. And we distribute to Lincoln and Boone County as well for them.
And then I've got one more question here. Someone asked, are there any specific needs or niches in the current market that aren't being met that farmers should be on the lookout for?
Oh yeah, a lot of people always hear this one, and it's tough though. It's fruit is always a big one. Um, and every market's going to be different too. So I'm talking mainly to like what I see here in the area. But I have people ask all the time for figs, which can grow here. I know people who do it. But yeah, fruit is always a big one. So if you can get good at that and you can nail down some type of fruit production, that would be great.
Awesome. Well, if no one else has any questions, I think that wraps up the Q&A portion. I really want to thank you all for joining us today for this beautiful afternoon. We really appreciate you all being here live with us today. We'll be sending out the recording of this shortly after. I really encourage you guys, if you have any questions, not just about the material in this presentation, but about the work that we do or about how we can help you as a farmer through our food hub or through our technical assistance programs, please don't hesitate to reach out to Robert. You can see his email here. I'll also drop my contact information in the chat as well. My name is Kelsey and I am the program manager for Refresh Appalachia. So I can help you make sure that we get you exactly the help that you need. I again just want to say thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate you.
And thanks again, everybody.